Hello everybody, how you doing? Hope you're having a good day. Decided to try to get this video done now because we have a break in the wind. In the last few days we've had pretty steady winds of 20 to 25 knots with gusts from 30 to 40 knots, and just all day and all night. It was calmer about 10 minutes ago, so it may start getting gnarly again. It's supposed to pick up and we're supposed to have those winds for another couple days. But anyway, I wanted to do this other video continuing on in my series of projects that I did on Lemaire during the pandemic, mostly in 2020, but here we are in 2021 and we're still dealing with it, so there may be a whole second series on this. Although hopefully by the time I'm done with my 2020 project videos, I can be a little bit more real-time or up-to-date with my projects. But anyway, in the last video I did, I had worked on reconfiguring the rigging on the Lemaire to allow for a more effective single-handed sailing, and I'm really happy with the way that project turned out. Haven't had a chance to really test it under real-world conditions yet. Would like to take it out when there's some pretty decent wind, not like we've had the last few days, but more in the 18 to 20 knot range, so I can test the mainly the reef points, make sure that that's all working well, and fine tune it as need be. But I'm pretty sure it's going to be good, and again, I'm pretty happy with that. So after I finished that project, I was feeling emboldened by my fiberglassing and epoxy skills and so forth. I decided to tackle another project that I've actually been kind of thinking about and dealing with really since about the time I bought Lemaire. The Cavalier 39 foot is a modified fin keel boat, and what that offers is a larger area as opposed to a standard fin keel. And that larger area allows for some additional storage or tankage, as the case may be. And in Lemaire's case, what I have is a 100-gallon integral water tank in the keel, and for better or worse, a extremely deep bilge. Now, it's that bilge that's been kind of a challenge for me. In fact, one of the very first projects I did on Lemaire was to address the bilge pumps, because there was some standing water about 2 inches or so in the bilge, and when I would turn on the 2 pumps that were down there, they would just swirl the water around. They wouldn't empty the water out. So I had to pull them out, and that was a bit of a challenge because the bilge is about 5 feet deep, and it's just really tough to work down there. But I was able to get them up, and what I had discovered was the attachment points at both of the bilge pumps to the system that basically would let the water rise up and out and overboard had basically just disintegrated from corrosion. So again, the pumps were just pumping water back into the bilge, so I knew I had to fix that pretty immediately. So what I did, I came up with a solution, which was to take a piece of aluminum angle bar and cut it and bend it into kind of a Z shape with a platform at the bottom to mount one of the pumps to. And it was long enough that I could just lower the entire thing down into the bottom of the bilge, or the pump down to the bottom of the bilge, but still have the ability to pull that whole system up because it was right there at the top of the bilge. And then I just mounted it to the bulkhead there. And that's worked out, or that had worked out, perfectly for all the time until this recent project. But what I soon discovered over time through various projects and looking in the bilge, and also looking at the water tank, which is just in the section just after the bilge, there were some other issues that I was discovering, and one of which is there was fiberglass delaminating in both the water tank and in the bilge, at the very lower part of the bilge. And what I kind of come to a conclusion of that this boat might have run aground at one point, and there was some damage to the keel, and this was one of the attempted fixes. Now, real quick, with regards to the water tank, that's a whole nother project, and honestly, I haven't even fully tackled that yet. I'm kind of at a loss. So in a video that I'll do, maybe the next video or shortly thereafter, I want to do a video explaining my issues with the water tank and actually kind of open that up to the YouTube universe, because maybe somebody out there might have some suggestions on how to deal with it. But yeah, I'm kind of at a loss for it. And so anyway, that'll be coming up. And basically, having that challenge, I basically said, forget the water tank for now. Let me work in an area that I feel like I can have some success in, which is the bilge. And basically, my goal with the bilge was to raise the floor of the bilge. Obviously, I had to deal with the integrity issues and the construction part of that, and that was definitely high on the priority. But the end goal was to have a less deep bilge, just so it'd be easier to work with and deal with when I have to get into the bilge and work with pumps and so forth, but also just to raise the pumps up so that they'd be more efficient, because having a 5-foot rise to the top of to the sole, from the bottom of the bilge to the sole, and then another 12 feet or so with a very gradual rise out to the stern where there are through hulls. Those pumps, even some of the most powerful pumps that you would put on a cruising boat, just lose a great deal of efficiency with that kind of a rise. So I wanted to reduce that as much as possible. So that was the plan, and that's what I set about to do. So the first thing I had to do in order to tackle this whole project was to kind of take out or big portion of the fuel system, which basically meant the fuel lines coming from the fuel tank, which is in the section just forward of the bilge. The fuel line comes out of the bottom of the tank through a hole in the bulkhead and terminates at a pair of gate valves. One of the gate valves has a line going into the Raycor filter, which then continues onto the fuel, to the engine. The other gate valve terminated at a funky gravity-fed fuel gauge. And basically what that meant was it was just a plastic tube or a rubber tube that would come up the side of the wall, the bulkhead in the bilge, and the fuel tank is just on the other side of that. And it would go up to the top of where the tank is, and would curve around and drop down and basically just empty out into the bilge. The idea being that if you're, with gravity, if your fuel tank is full, then fuel is going to come into that tube and show you and indicate that it's full. And as you go down, the level in that tube would go down. But if you had a full or nearly full tank, that fuel would be right up to the crest of where that tube would kind of turn around and then dump out into the bilge. And if any kind of heel, you're just going to push fuel out, and that would just drain right into the bilge. And that's a variety of issues with that: environmental, potentially degradation of the fiberglass itself, and just a mess. And that was basically what I had to contend with, because the bilge was just caked with years and years and years of diesel. So that's why I had to disassemble all of that fuel stuff. And once I did that, I was able now to kind of start cleaning the bilge. And I tried a bunch of things. I sprayed on degreasers and let that sit for multiple days. I scrubbed, I used a power washer, and that all kind of helped, but it didn't get rid of the caked on mess completely. What did end up working, though, was soaking cloth or a rag in mineral spirits, and that took off a great deal of it. And then to kind of finalize it, I took a clean rag or multiple clean rags with Total Boat dewaxer and surface prep, and that really got like the rest of it off. And I would just do that repeatedly until I'd get a rag that would come off with no residue on it. And once I got to that point, then I knew I was in good shape to start prepping the surface, which included sanding and grinding. And again, all of this is challenging because of the depth of the bilge. So what I ended up doing is I had to come up with some tools that would allow me to get down there and you know, scrapers and sanding pads, and get down and kind of try to scrape off all this delaminated fiberglass. And basically it was chopped strand mat that was coming off. And at one point I even attached my angle grinder to a pole, and that was a little dicey because there's a lot of torque in the angle grinder, and getting that down there, I was afraid of losing control of that angle grinder and have it just kind of go off and tearing holes in the keel. But I made sure it was firmly attached to the pole, and just was very careful as I down there. And I had one hand I kept on the power plug, ready to pull it out in case I did lose control. But it worked out pretty good. In fact, I was able to grind back to a nice, good, clean, solid fiberglass. The only exception to that was at the very bottom of the bilge, down in the corners at the bottom. I just couldn't get anything down to those corners to grind away. And it was about the best that I can possibly do was just leave a little bit of this old glass in there. Fortunately, down to the bottom was fairly tight in there, but it did leave some voids that I wanted to address. And so basically what I did is I got some polyurethane rigid closed cell foam, and I got a sheet of 1.5 inch wide foam. And I took two pieces, cut them out roughly to the shape of the bottom of the bilge, and then I sandwiched them together to make a 3-inch plug, is what I call it. And so I sandwiched them together with some epoxy and a sheet of 1708, let that cure, then I cut the plug to be a more precise shape to fit into the bilge. And then I wrapped that thing entirely in 1708 and did some fairing on it to get it nice and smooth, and then did a couple layers of chopped strand mat just to make sure that this thing was solid as a rock. So once that was all done and cured and ready to go, then I started putting fiberglass on the walls and on the inside corners of the lower half of the bilge, the section that I was going to ultimately fill up and close off. And so I did that, laid in the 1708, and while that was still, you know, kind of tacky, I mixed up a slurry of thickened epoxy using West System 406, and then some 1/2 inch long loose chopped strand that I bought in bulk. And I mixed that together into a nice thick slurry, and I poured that down into the bottom. And I poured enough so that when I put the plug in and pushed it down into the slurry would squeeze out of the edges, and it would fill in any of those nooks and crannies, both in the bottom of the bilge and on that side area, and squeeze up just over to the top of the plug. And that worked out perfectly. So when that was all cured, you know, the walls, I felt like the 1708 were definitely made it much more, the integrity of the walls, you know, far greater than they were when I bought the boat. And that plug just tied in the sides and the bottom and those inside quarters, so I felt really good about that. So next I wanted to fill in that void, that whole space at the bottom of the bilge, and raise the floor up. So what I did for that is I used Total Boat 2-part expanding polyurethane foam. And I figured out how much of the area it was that I needed to fill up, and mixed it up, and I did it in like 3 quick pours, one right after the other, so it was still in a liquid state as I put in each batch. But once, and it didn't take too long, several minutes, it would rise up and harden, and it rose just to exactly the point in the bilge that I wanted to, and it was ideal. So now at that point I could focus my attention on the upper part of the bilge, which was going to now be the new finished bilge. I had to do a little bit of trimming of the expanding foam, and I did some fairing compound on the edges and on the top just to make it nice and smooth and level. And I made a similar plug out of that rigid polyurethane foam that was going to now be the new bottom of the bilge. I only used one thickness of a 1.5 inch, but that was going to be the new bottom. One of the things I did is I carved in some channels in it, and a little indentation at the very center where the main bilge pump was going to sit. So that way any water that got into the bilge would basically run into the middle of the bilge right underneath that main pump. That way no water could pool or anywhere else. In addition, I put a little riser on one of the sides for a secondary backup pump and a float switch, so that if the water level rose to over 3 inches in the bilge, that pump would automatically kick in. It's a bigger pump and hopefully would take care of any water of a significant value. So then I went ahead and I glassed in all the walls in the new, upper bilge area. Same thing with the 1708, same process for making a slurry and dropping in the new bottom. I did pay particular attention to the edges of all that. I wanted to make sure that there was no way for water to seep down. So, made sure there was extra thickened epoxy in there, and then I glassed in several layers of glass on the edges all around. And I actually did a whole nother series of layers of glass on top and on the sides, right where that new floor was, just to really make extra sure. And yeah, when it all cured and all was said and done, it looked really good, nice and solid floor. I put on 3 coats of a Total Boat epoxy bilge paint, and so it's nice and finished, it's dry and secure, and pumps are in there and they're all working the way they're supposed to. So I'm really happy about the way that project worked out. Now I know there are some people that wouldn't suggest using a foam, like the expanding foam, in an area below the water line, because if it gets wet, it's basically just gonna just absorb that water. But my feeling was I was to pay particular attention to making sure that no water could go from the new bilge below and seep down, and I'm pretty confident that it won't do that. So really any water that could hit that foam is going to be if the keel is breached somehow, and at that point I'm going to have much bigger problems than some wet foam. Anyway, like with any other project that you do on a boat, one project kind of reveals another project, and that was certainly the case here when after I emptied out the fuel tank as part of the whole fuel issue, or the fuel part of this project. Just thought, I'm going to go ahead and do an inspection on the fuel tank, see what's going on, because maybe, the fact that there's so much fuel in the bilge, there might be some other issues or reasons for that. And sure enough, I did find issues with the tank. But that's going to be the topic of my next video that I do. So I'm going to leave this one here. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you did, I would appreciate it if you could give it a thumbs up. And if you're not a subscriber yet, it would be really helpful to the channel if you would subscribe. And go ahead and click the notification button so that you can know every time that I post a new video. Anyway, that's it for now. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Take care, and we'll see you next time.